For decades now, the U.S. Capitol has been a hotspot not only for tourists but for immigrants looking for a better future. Politics have played a historical role in the debate to legitimize an immigrant's right to stay in the country. What are you most hopeful about?
I think there's still a lot of sympathy for young people that have grown up in this country, and this is their country, and that's recognized by Republicans and Democrats. I think there's a real push to do something about agricultural workers, which is a smaller group, but it's an important part of our workforce, and they've been essential workers during COVID. And there seems to be a good bipartisan agreement between Republicans and Democrats to get something done to make our farm worker program a little more modern and to bring some people, into legal status who've been here illegally. I'm optimistic that at some point we can have a real conversation about visas and who comes into this country and what we do about our high-skilled visas and our low-skilled visas and everything. Look at the whole thing. I think we're a couple years from that, but I think it's possible. And I'm optimistic that the Biden administration is actually taking Mexico and Central America seriously in a way that I think we haven't seen before. I think George Bush was probably the last president who took Mexico very seriously, but now it's Central America as well. And I think, we're seeing a Biden administration that is actually deeply engaged in trying to figure out what's going to work so we break this cycle of people showing up at the border every 2 or 3 years. And I think it's going to take them a while to get there, but they seem surprisingly persistent about this. So that makes me optimistic too.
Andrew Selee is the director of the Migration Policy Institute here in Washington, D.C. His ideas and research help shape the immigration and integration policies of the United States. He's a former U.S. congressional staff member who worked on issues like immigration. Selee has written extensively on migration from Latin America and is the author of Vanishing Frontiers, The Forces Driving Mexico and the United States Together. I grew up in Southern California. I lived in Central California, and I think when we think of immigrants, it's that image in the 80s of, driving by the fields and seeing field workers. And yet you talk about this kind of renaissance, these professional, educated Mexicans who are coming here and serving these other roles. And yet that's not the image most Americans have, is it?
We've seen a real shift, particularly with Mexican immigrants. I mean, most people, until the past few months may be changing, but until the past few months, what we've seen is mostly people coming through legal channels, mostly with fairly good education, and about 1 in 5, 1 in 6 actually having a college education, which is a huge change from 20 years ago. I mean, it's a really, even a change from 10 years ago. It's a different population. It's partially because Mexicans are more educated in Mexico. The country is, has just increased its educational opportunity. So Mexicans on average are more educated, but also more and more people come through legal channels. Now that may be changing in the past few months, and we can talk about that. But that has been the pattern, sort of from 2010 to 2020.
You said we can talk about that, which is kind of your profession, isn't it? It's always a shifting
That's
stance.
Right. As soon as you say something with certainty, it turns around.
Why
and something
is
else
that?
Happens. I think because we're talking about human beings, and human beings respond to what's going on in their environment. And as soon as we see trend lines, I mean, they may continue, they may be the sign of things to come, but major crises come along and knock us off our certainties. And we're certainly living through one of those crises right now.
So COVID has changed everything, really.
Yeah. I think COVID has upended a lot of what we knew. COVID has really, it's obviously hit this country hard, and unemployment was very high for a long period of time, and some people are still out of work because of COVID or taking less paying jobs. But it's hit Mexico and Central America a lot harder than it hit the U.S. And Mexico had 8% negative growth last year. I mean, that's enormous. Central America is probably worse. Central America got hit by a couple of hurricanes too, and on top of everyone's misery in the fall. Having natural disasters didn't help. And so people really are suffering. And the things that are usually the escape valves for people, being able to go out into the informal market and maybe sell something at market, or make food and sell it, or start a little household cafe, those things didn't work during COVID because of lockdowns. And so the usual escape valves that Mexicans and Central Americans are used to going through crises, but this time there was really no way around the crisis, and a lot of people have been hurting.
The flow of immigrants goes both ways across the U.S.-Mexico border. From 2009 to 2014, 1 million Mexican immigrants, including their American-born children, moved from the U.S. to Mexico, versus 870,000 who immigrated from Mexico to the U.S. Another common misconception is that they're coming here, we're not going there, but there are a lot of Americans who are moving to Mexico.
There
right?
are. There are as many Americans in Mexico as probably in all of Europe. I mean, there's probably somewhere, officially in Mexico, there's 800,000 Americans. In reality, it's probably closer to 1.5 million. It's a large number. I mean, there's a lot of Americans. Some are Americans of Mexican descent who've gone back with parents who are Mexican. Some are people who choose to retire in Mexico, or they've moved there with a company. And among millennials, there's been a huge movement of people just going to Mexico because they like living there and it's cheap and it's beautiful, and they're working remote jobs anyway. And so you walk into any nice cafe in Mexico City and you run into Americans, a few Europeans and Canadians who just have chosen to live there and work out of whatever cafe they can find. And it's surprising.
The United States and Mexico have strong economic ties. The U.S. is Mexico's largest trading partner, while Mexico is the third largest trading partner for the U.S. and its #1 source of immigrants. The two countries share a 2,000-mile border where illegal migration and trade, including drugs, cross over, sending a ripple effect farther south. Let me ask you about this relationship between the United States and its neighbors to the south. How would you describe it?
It's an intense relationship, it's an interconnected relationship, and it's a difficult relationship because we're at different stages of development and there are different needs in each country. But we are deeply connected in ways that I think most Americans don't always realize.
Let's talk about connection, and not necessarily between the neighbors to the south, neighbors here in the United States. When you think of border towns, I know you lived in San Diego for a time. I've been to San Diego, close to Tijuana. I've been to Nogales. Some of these border communities, they view this issue differently than communities in other parts of the country.
Completely. No, they are really interconnected. So border communities live off each other. They live in synergy with each other. And it's very natural for people to go back and forth. And I actually lived for a while. I lived in Tijuana and I lived in San Diego. And both times, it was great. I lived in Tijuana, went to San Diego. When I lived in San Diego, I went to Tijuana. There is an interdependence in the economies and the families, in where people shop even, that's hard for the rest of us sort of further away to understand, but they really are connected deeply.
They have a better understanding of the issues, you think?
Oh yeah, I have a better understanding, which doesn't mean they're not affected by the issues. I mean, when there's a large number of people coming to the border, it also affects them, right? I mean, so there are things that happen, but they also understand it in a different way because they're used to being constantly connected and they're used to the back and forth of people across the border.
For our efforts to humanely regain control of our borders and thereby preserve the value of one of the most sacred possessions of our people, American citizenship.
The Immigration Reform and Control Act of 1986 was the first major revision of the U.S. immigration laws in decades. It prohibited employers from knowingly hiring unauthorized immigrants. This act also legalized the majority of migrants who arrived to the U.S. prior to January 1st of 1982, although it didn't go as expected. When you look at the United States and immigration policy, immigration reform, I mean, we look at that, the last time really that it happened was Reagan, right? I mean, that's a lifetime ago. And things have only started to kind of go in a number of different directions. What's been the cost of not addressing this over such a lengthy period of time?
I think the cost is to our well-being as a country and to our competitiveness as a country. I mean, we've ended up with a population of 11 or 12 million undocumented people in this country who are not as productive as they could be and not as part of American society as they want to be and could be. And I think that's a cost. It's a cost that drags us all down, not just them. It just is, we're not productive and we're not, and not everyone's able to participate in the community in the same way. And it's a cost because we haven't figured out what our legal immigration system should look like. I mean, there's a real, among industrial countries, we are the only country that mostly brings in people through our legal system through family members rather than through employment. And that may be something we want to do, but that's a national conversation we should be having. I mean, there probably are niches in the economy where we want to be thinking about who we want to bring in, what skill sets people have. That's what Canada does, that's what the UK does, that's what Sweden does. You know, we don't do that. And not having that conversation is a cost to us as well. And then there's a cost, you know, in our relationship with the neighbors, which we're seeing now, which is, you know, because we live in a neighborhood where lots of people want to get to the United States. I'm not talking about the Canadians, of course, but although a lot of Canadians live in the US too, but a lot of us live up there. But Mexicans, and particularly Central Americans these days, more than Mexicans, a lot of people want to get into the US. We haven't created the pathways for them to come. And so what we see every 2 or 3 years is we have a border crisis. You know, and everyone runs around trying to fix it. We had one in, you know, 2019 under Trump. We had 2 under Obama in 2014 and 2016, and we're having one now under Biden in 2021. You know, this keeps hitting us. It's like lightning keeps hitting us in the same place, and we haven't moved. You know, and at some point you've got to realize that you have to move to a different spot. And in this case, this means, you know, fixing what's underneath this, and that's creating some legal channels for people to come from Central America to the United States, at least as seasonal workers, because they're coming one way or the other. So let's create a way of doing it that's a little bit smarter. So we've left all those things on the table, and we haven't addressed them. And I think those all generate costs, and they all hit, you know, not just migrants, they hit all of us, and they hit us as a society.
It does seem, though, when I think about immigration, it's similar to like the tax code. There's loopholes, there's imperfections, and it seems like every time somebody wants to take a stab at it, there's new loopholes or imperfections. I mean, why is that?
These are things that affect so many people. You know, it's both, in the case of immigration, it's symbolically fraught, but also I think it's in the case of taxes or healthcare, right? But there's also multiple interests around it, that it's hard to get anything done without carving out little pieces. I mean, I would love to see a comprehensive immigration reform. That's something we've tried in this country 3 times already. Where you try and look at the whole system, but every time that's tried, you end up with loopholes built in, with exceptions, with compromises made that don't totally make sense, but it's probably the best way to go. But I think realistically, given the way our system operates, you know, you maybe get one big change, you know, one big systemic change every presidential administration, maybe 2 if you're lucky. I think we're more likely to see a piecemeal approach and see pieces fixed. And so, you know, it's up to people like us who are on the outside to keep pushing for what the system could look like in the future, and the people who are, you know, in the decision-making roles to tackle the pieces that they think they can politically get away with.
We're going to let you get back to doing the pushing. Good luck with all of that. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Hey, pleasure to be with you.